The year is 892. Winter has sealed the northern seas beneath a sky the color of iron. Along a frozen coastline, where pine forests lean toward the water like silent witnesses, a longship cuts through the waves with slow, deliberate strokes. The oars rise and fall in perfect rhythm, their wood groaning under strain. No songs are sung. No laughter carries across the water. This is not a voyage of celebration. It is a return. Below the deck, bound with rope and pressed against damp planks, slick with salt and cold, sit the captives. Women taken from river towns and farming villages, from isolated monasteries whose bells rang once more before smoke swallowed the sound. Their wrists are raw where rope has bitten into skin. Their throats ache from thirst. Some stare into the dark, unmoving. Others whisper prayers beneath their breath, unsure whether their God can still hear them so far from home. They believe the worst is already behind them. They are wrong. What awaited them on that shore was worse than death. This chapter of Viking history does not appear in the sagas carved into stone or sung in great halls. It is absent from the heroic tales of exploration and battle. It survives only in fragments, in foreign chronicles, in missionary letters written with shaking hands, in warnings passed down among people who never returned. It was buried not because it was insignificant, but because it was effective, because it worked. The question isn't whether this story is difficult to hear. The question is whether you are willing to remember it. Because what Viking warlords forced upon captive women was not random cruelty or uncontrolled violence. It was structured, intentional, ritualized. And once you understand that, the legend of the Viking warrior begins to crack. To understand what happened to these women, you must first abandon the modern image of Vikings as wild, lawless raiders, driven only by hunger and bloodlust. That image is comfortable because it suggests chaos. Chaos is easier to dismiss. The truth is far more unsettling. The Viking world was ordered. Violence was governed by rules. Power was measured carefully. Reputation mattered more than mercy. Raiding was not an accident of savagery. It was an economy. Gold could be stolen, livestock driven away, but people were the most valuable prize of all. Captives could be traded, sold, married off, or absorbed into households, strengthening alliances and expanding influence. But before any of that could happen, something had to be done. A captive who still remembered who she was dangerous. She carried a past, a name, a god, a language. Those things had to be stripped away before she could be controlled. And so Viking warlords developed something more effective than chains or blades. They developed ritual. The longship beaches just before dawn. Frost crunches beneath boots as warriors step onto land. Torches flare to life, their flames bending in the wind. The captives are hauled onto the shore and forced to kneel. No one rushes, no one shouts. The calm is what makes it terrifying. They are counted, not by name, by number. Cold water is thrown over them from wooden buckets, washing away blood, ash, and dirt from the raid. Hair is pulled loose from braids. Torn clothing is adjusted, not out of kindness, but because disorder has no place here. One woman struggles, lashing out weakly. She is not struck. She is ignored. Silence is the first lesson. Among the captives are 3 women who will remember this night differently. One is older, her face lined by years of endurance. She has buried children. She has survived famine and disease. She understands that survival does not always mean living. Her eyes move constantly, reading the scene, searching for patterns. She knows something deliberate is unfolding. Another is young, barely more than a girl. Her hands still bear the softness of someone who believed life followed rules. She glances toward the forest repeatedly, as if expecting someone to emerge and stop this. She still believes rescue is possible. The third woman says nothing at all. She learned during the raid that silence draws less attention. She does not cry. She does not plead. She watches. They are marched away from the shoreline toward the encampment. Fires burn in a wide circle, casting shadows that stretch and twist across the frozen ground. Warriors gather around the perimeter, not crowding, not jeering. Their positions are deliberate. Hierarchy is visible even in the way they stand. At the center waits the warlord. He does not touch the women, not yet. He studies them as one might study livestock or tools. To him, this moment is not about impulse or desire. It is about authority. These women are proof of victory, proof that his power reaches beyond the sword. The ritual begins not with violence, but with removal. The women are forced to stand. Any attempt to speak in their own language is silenced with a sharp command. A translator is unnecessary. Meaning is conveyed through tone, posture, and the unmistakable weight of dominance. This is the moment many captives begin to break, not because of pain, but because of recognition. They realize what is happening has been done before, many times. This is not improvisation, it is rehearsal. The purpose of the ritual is transformation. Among Viking warbands, identity was sacred. Lineage defined worth. Reputation defined survival. A captive who retained her former self was a threat, not because she might rebel, but because she carried memory. Memory resists assimilation. The ritual was designed to erase that memory. Each woman is made to witness what awaits others, not in explicit detail, not in ways that leave visible marks, but enough to understand, enough to imagine. Fear spreads quietly, like ice creeping across water. The older woman lowers her head, breathing slowly, conserving strength. The young one trembles, her breath shallow and uneven. The silent one does not move at all. This is not about pleasure. It is about control. Those who resist are separated, not beaten, not killed. Their punishment comes later. Isolation, hunger, being marked as cursed, being denied even the status of property. Those who endure are not spared. They are assigned. When the ritual ends, there is no celebration, no triumph. The fires burn lower. The warriors disperse. The women are led away, their futures already decided. Some will be claimed by men whose names they will never speak willingly. Others will be sold at markets far from this shore. A few will simply vanish, their ends never recorded. They will live, but not as themselves. Foreign observers noticed this long before historians acknowledged it. Traders, moving through Viking lands, wrote of women who moved through households like shadows. They spoke the language fluently, but without accent, as if it had overwritten something else. Missionaries encountered women who flinched at certain words, certain gestures, though no scars marked their bodies. One chronicler wrote that these women walked afterward, spoke afterward, looked afterward, but something inside them was absent, as if a door had been closed and sealed. Children born to them grew up knowing only one side of their heritage. Mothers were forbidden from teaching songs, prayers, or names from before. The past became a forbidden language, locked behind silence. In this way, the ritual achieved its purpose. Not just control of bodies, but extinction of memory. This is how conquest was made permanent. Not through slaughter, which creates martyrs, but through survival that carries no voice. By the time the snow melted and the ships sailed again, the coastline bore no sign of what had happened there. No bloodstains, no mass graves, only the absence of women who never returned home. And somewhere beneath the frozen soil, beneath centuries of forgetting, the ground waited. Because the ground remembers what songs try to erase. For centuries, the land kept its silence. The snow melted and returned. Forests grew thicker. Shores shifted. Villages rose and fell. The longships vanished from memory, replaced by churches, then roads, then modern towns. And yet, beneath the soil, beneath the carefully told legends, traces remained. Because the ground remembers what songs tried to erase. When archaeologists first began uncovering burial sites across Scandinavia and the North Atlantic coastlands, they noticed something unsettling. Among the graves of warriors marked with weapons and symbols of honor were women whose bones told a different story. Their skeletal structure suggested origins far from the land where they were buried. Their teeth carried chemical signatures of diets that did not match the region. Their grave goods were mismatched, foreign pendants, unfamiliar symbols, objects that belonged to another culture entirely. These women had not traveled willingly. In some graves, their burial position did not match local customs. In others, they were laid carefully, almost respectfully, yet without the honors given to native women. It was as if they existed in a category of their own, present but never fully belonging. Historians once dismissed these findings as evidence of migration or intermarriage, but the patterns did not align. Too many women, too wide a geographic spread, too consistent a sense of rupture in their lives. Something had happened before they arrived in these lands. Something that changed them. Slowly, reluctantly, scholars began to look again at the written sources that had been overlooked or dismissed for centuries. Frankish monks wrote of raids where women were taken but never returned, their names vanishing from village records overnight. Slavic oral traditions warned of northern men who did not simply take captives, but broke them before the breaking of bread. Arabic travelers passing through Viking trade routes recorded encounters with women who spoke multiple languages, but refused to speak of their past. One writer noted that these women avoided eye contact and never spoke when men were present, even years after captivity. These were not the behaviors of people who had merely been defeated. They were the behaviors of people who had been reshaped. The ritual was never written down by the Vikings themselves. That is not an accident. Viking culture valued memory and story, but only certain kinds of stories. Glory was preserved. Strength was celebrated. Shame was buried. What was done to captive women did not belong in heroic narrative. It was not meant to be admired. It was meant to work. The purpose of the ritual was never simply domination in the moment. It was permanence. A woman who had passed through it could not easily return to who she had been, even if she escaped, even if she survived, even if she lived long enough to see her homeland again. Because the ritual did not end when the fire died. It followed her into every day that came after. Women forced into Viking households learned quickly that survival depended on obedience. Not only physical obedience, but cultural obedience. Language was the first thing to go. Speaking in their native tongue was discouraged, then punished. Names were replaced with Norse ones, easier to pronounce, easier to command. Gods were mocked or forbidden. Children born to them were raised without knowledge of where their mothers came from. The past became dangerous. Some women resisted quietly. They whispered prayers while grinding grain. They traced symbols in ash that would be wiped away by morning. They remembered songs, but never sang them aloud. Resistance became internal, invisible. Others learned not to remember at all. This was the final cruelty of the ritual. It did not simply take control of the body. It forced the mind to choose between memory and survival. Many chose survival, and so the Viking expansion endured. But endurance leaves traces. In recent decades, advances in archaeology and forensic science have allowed researchers to reconstruct lives from fragments. Trauma patterns in bones suggest repeated stress not associated with combat. Healed fractures indicate long-term survival under harsh conditions. Teeth show abrupt dietary changes consistent with forced relocation. In one burial uncovered near a coastal settlement, a woman was found clutching a small object pressed tightly against her chest. It was a pendant unlike any Norse design, worn smooth by constant handling. Analysis suggested it had been held repeatedly over many years, likely during moments of fear or prayer. It was not buried with her as decoration. It had been buried with her as identity. That pendant was the only thing she carried to the end. The sagas never mention her. They never mention the countless women like her. Instead, they tell stories of great men, of voyages and battles, of feasts and honor. They speak of strength as if it were simple, clean, admirable. But strength built on erasure carries a different legacy. Every empire tells stories about itself. Stories that justify its existence. Stories that turn suffering into necessity. The Vikings were no different. What makes this story difficult is not only what was done, but how successful it was. The ritual worked precisely because it left no spectacle, no mass graves, no public executions, no martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. Resistance creates stories. Stories travel. The Viking ritual created silence. Silence was the goal. And for centuries, silence prevailed. Until the ground began to speak. The graves, the bones, the foreign objects buried far from home. The written fragments dismissed for generations. Together, they tell a story that cannot be fully erased. A story of women who survived something meant to make them disappear. This story matters not because it condemns Vikings as uniquely cruel. History is filled with empires that used similar methods. What matters is understanding how power behaves when it believes it will never be questioned. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it kneels rituals into existence and calls them tradition. Sometimes it convinces the world that what was done was inevitable. It was not. The women taken in the winter of 892 were not destined to vanish. Their erasure was a choice, a calculated decision made by men who understood that control of memory is more powerful than control of land. They lost their names. They lost their languages. Many lost their ability to speak of who they had been. But they did not lose everything. They left traces in the soil, in the bones, in the objects they refused to let go of, even when everything else was stripped away. History often belongs to the victors. Memory belongs to those who endure. Somewhere along that frozen coast, long after the fires burned out and the longships sailed away, the snow covered the footprints of women who walked into lives they did not choose. The land closed over them. Time moved on. But they were there, and because you listened, they are remembered. This story is not about Vikings alone. It is about what power does when no one is watching. About how systems of domination survive not through constant violence, but through quiet transformation. About how easily people can be erased without being killed. And about how fragments of truth endure anyway. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe the past deserves honesty rather than comfort, then stay with us. Because some truths were buried for a reason, and some voices were silenced, not because they were weak, but because they were dangerous. The ritual ended centuries ago. The silence does not have to.